Hello, everyone. Hang on one second. Little difficulties here. Mike, I'm going to put you on the screen.
Okay.
Something's going on with my camera.
Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Why don't you introduce the show?
Okay, everyone. This is the look back at the second anniversary of the Idaho 4 killings, when Megan Mogan, Kaylee Gonzalez, Xander Knodel, and Ethan Chapin were killed in their off-campus house next to the University of Idaho. And it's a look back to talk about what has gone on in the case, what is going on, and what will go on. There was a recent a meeting where Ann Taylor, the defense attorney, tried to have the death penalty taken off the table. The judge is going to rule on that. Most likely she will lose that motion. The trial is set for August of 2025. And Judge Hippler, the new judge who's assigned to the case, is going to have about 8 weeks available for altogether for the prosecution and the defense, so that they can both have time to present their cases. So at that point, that's what's going to happen for the future. There will be more pre-trial motions by Ann Taylor every couple of months, I'm sure. And so we'll be bringing that to you also to keep you abreast of everything that's going on in the case. But today we're going to be looking back and talking about the case, what happened originally. We have Dr. Debbie Goodman, perfectly, right, just there, and to talk about the criminology behind the alleged perpetrator, Brian Kohberger. And we're going to have Bill come on in a few minutes, as soon as he's ready, and we'll talk about the case. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight.
You know, Mike, you're going to have to take the lead. I'm having problems with this camera.
Okay. Anyway, if you remember back in November 13th, 2022, at the Kings Road house, where off-campus house from the University of Idaho, where the Megan Mogan and Kaylee Gonzalez and Xander Knodel and Ethan Chapin, there was they had gotten back to the home late that night. It was the night of it was a Sunday evening, I believe it was. I think it was a Sunday evening, and they all got back very, very late. Probably somewhere between midnight and 3 o'clock in the morning. They were all there. There was also 2 other roommates, Dylan Mortensen and one other inmate whose name I can't remember right now, but they were there that early morning, and there was a DoorDash delivery made to Xander Knodel about just about a few minutes after 4, and then that seemed to be it. And that's when the police believed that a gentleman named Brian Kohberger entered the scene and committed the atrocities. Oh, there's Bill.
Wow. I got back on the screen, guys. I apologize. Something happened with my camera. Here I am. Mike did an excellent impromptu there. Anyway, folks, hold on to your hats. Hold on to your camera, because I just went off the air. We're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone.
There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
Before we start the show, first, a word from our sponsor. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA and college basketball, NHL to UFC and MMA. Head to BetOnline today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. Amazing, guys. You know, when you're dealing with live broadcasts, you have to be ready for whatever happens. So now you already know who's on the show because we had to go to them in an emergency situation. Welcome to the show, retired NYPD Sergeant, professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney. Welcome, Mike Geary. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, Bill, good to see you. Very good to see you.
Wow, I didn't freak out. I just handed it to Mike. It happened. Anyway, we also have from a criminologist, PhD in criminologist, Dr. Debbie Goodman from St. Thomas University in Northern Miami. Dr. Debbie, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Sergeant Bill, Professor Mike, the viewers. So delighted to join you this evening.
And you know, I see Matt Murphy backstage. He was fixing his hair. So let me put him right back on the screen. Matt,
thank you. Trying to get my stupid Bluetooth to work.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
haunted by technology. I think I was born 100 years too late. So,
you know, Matt, if you saw, my camera went off the screen. I didn't freak out. I just handed it to Mike, and Mike had a similar situation like this once before. Anyway, what we're talking about today, guys, is right up on the screen there. The Idaho 4 case 2 years later. And when we say the Idaho 4 case, I hate to reduce those 4 young people to a number. We all know we're talking about Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, Zana Knodel, and Kaylee Gonsalves. And this case has been sort of moving along at a snail's pace, but really by way of the defense has chosen that route because, you know, they waived the speedy trial thing. And just as we know, just to recap, the case was moved to Boise, Idaho, out of Moscow, Idaho, out of Latah County. So that was all for the defense. You know, Matt, I don't know if you followed this week, but it seems like the defense is like re-arguing the legality and the constitutionality of the death penalty. And it almost seems to me like a waste of time. Your thoughts?
Well, it is a waste of time. This is an actual waste of time, this part of it. They have to raise that issue originally because the name of the game on appeal in front of the Ninth Circuit is what's known as IAC, or ineffective assistance of counsel. So the defense has to advance every sort of rational argument they can, but they've already argued this point. It's already been denied. There's already a substantial amount of precedent in the state of Idaho that shot down this argument. They didn't invent this wheel. This has been done before. So now it's just kind of, it's like, you know, guys, you made your point, you checked the box. It's not getting reversed for IAC on that issue. So what are you doing? And I think that what happened is we have the change of venue, of course, and we have a new judge. So I think they're hoping to, it's almost like they think that with the change of venue, they get not only a new set of downs, but they get a new referee, and it's just not the way it works. So this will go nowhere. And look, this is a part of capital case litigation. You see stuff like this all the time. So it won't hurt the prosecution. In the end of the day, this is a big nothing burger.
Absolutely. You know, Dr. Debbie, we watched this case from the very beginning. And one of the things that we couldn't understand was that they allowed them to knock that house down. Mm. The house that was so much evidence. And, you know, the power of bringing the jury there in this trial, you can't minimize that. But yet the decision was made to knock that house down. Your thoughts?
Right. Well, Sergeant Bill, my thought is I would have preferred that this house remain intact. And during our conversations, we've talked about a lot of cases whereby jury members go directly to the scene. And I think it has an impact. You know, I'm here in Florida and was involved with the Nicholas Cruz case. And I think that's an example wherein the structure was maintained until the case was brought to closure and after the jury had an opportunity to walk through. So I was not in favor of it. I think part of the conversation perhaps was that the university president didn't want the students to start the semester with, the potential trauma and reminder of what had happened. But I think in giving the victims their voice, which is certainly what we're doing today, I would have rather it remain up until the totality of this case is brought to the finish line.
Absolutely. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, I would much prefer to have that house there. I would think as a prosecutor, you'd want to take the jury through that house to see it from what would have been the victims' perspectives, even though they were sleeping, but they were in that house. I know that they sprayed a lot of luminol all over the place. I know they ripped up a lot of carpet. They probably removed some pieces of wall. And I think there was some talk about it being some sort of a little bit of toxicity in the environment. But I think of the Murdaugh case down in South Carolina, the defense brought the jurors, and the defense's case in chief brought the jurors over there to the crime scene where the alleged killings had happened. And it did convince, I think, the jury about the real validity of the prosecution's arguments and the prosecution's theory of the case, and really not so much with the defense's case. And I think in that case, they went to deliberate. I think they were done within a day. And so it seemed to be a real faux pas for the defense to go there. And I think for a prosecutor, I would think, and Matt would know much better, but I would think you'd want that there to walk them through the crime scene, to just get the horror of what went on there.
Matt, I spoke to you, and I actually you had a video when you were on Elizabeth Vargas, and she had asked you, it was on News Nation, about this case. And you said the evidence in this case, and I'm sorry to quote you again, because people killed me the last time and killed you. You didn't even know, you didn't read the chat, but that's okay. You're used to that. Well, you said the evidence in the Idaho case is overwhelming. And I mean, I agree with you, but just me saying that right now, I can feel the venom coming out of so many people that think this case is something different than what it actually is. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, if I could just pick up where Professor Mike and the good doctor I couldn't agree with them more on knocking down the house. That's just the dumbest thing ever. That was a vanity project by the university. What 18-year-old kid walking by a house that a murder took place in is going to be traumatized? And that's just I could rant for that for 10 minutes. I can't criticize the university strongly enough on that. It's unreal. And it created additional anxiety for the victims' families, who are pretty much the only people, in my view, that they owe a responsibility to at this point. So that said, no, the evidence in this case, properly tried, and of course that's the big caveat, this is overwhelming because you have a collage, you have multiple facets. And, what we have is his DNA is found not just at the crime scene, but his DNA is found on a sheath where a Marine Corps K-bar knife was originally held, and that was consistent with the weapon that was used to slaughter these poor 4 kids. And then you have the cell phone evidence, and I've presented that evidence in court many times, where you're trying to place a particular defendant in an area at the time murder happens. And when you have a distance that's traveled, sometimes you just get a ping in the area. But when you're traveling a distance, it's like footprints on a beach. And it is incredibly convincing. And you basically get the AT&T rep or the Verizon rep, and it's the same one that testifies in all the cases. It's the same one. They're actually very good at it. And they explain the engineering, how cell phone towers work, how they're triangulated. And it's one of those things that some of it's really technical and some of it is very, very common sense, because we carry these things around with us everywhere we go. And we see the transponders, and they're designed to go to the nearest tower or the next nearest tower. And at that area, at that time in the morning, in a heavy traffic period of time. Sometimes they'll relay, but at 2 a.m, that is going to be a perfect imprint of Brian Kohberger driving towards the scene. When you're pinging up different towers, you can even calculate the speed and the time, and it fits like a glove. Where he was driving to Moscow, Idaho, and the time of the murder, and that car driving around on video, all of those things combine. It's like a collage. Then on top of that, you've got Brian Kohberger's behavior when he was at his parents' house in Pennsylvania. This is a detail that almost nobody talks about. Brian Kohberger, who was a PhD student in criminology, would know that once you throw something away, you no longer have a reasonable expectation of privacy on that. So what do you do if you're worried that the police might get your DNA, or you're worried, and something only the killer would know, that the DNA was left at the scene, or might have been left at the scene on that sheath, because he knows he didn't have it. He was throwing his trash away in his neighbor's trash can. You know, I had a next door neighbor who had a 16-year-old daughter who used to have parties every time the parents were home. She would throw away all the booze bottles in my trash can, and I think we all probably did that as teenagers. That's called consciousness of guilt.
Oh my
God. And there's one reason to do that, and that's
Matt. That's a Gearyism. Mike says that all the time. When you said it, I was like, "Oh, he stole it from you, Mike."
No, he's right. That's why he's a professor. But no, the jury's going to get instructed on that, and there's one reasonable interpretation of that evidence. And if Brian Kohberger is innocent, you know, he's got nothing to worry about, unless there's some other crime he's worried about the police getting his DNA on. And then remember, on the cell phone pings, look, he turned his phone off. He was smart enough to know, hey, I shouldn't have my phone pinging near the murder scene at the time, without realizing that it makes him look even worse because he's heading directly towards the murder scene. Turns his phone off again, consciousness of guilt. Like, he brought it with him, so he's smart enough to turn it off, but he was dumb enough not to realize that it should have stayed at home. So, you know, this is probably his first rodeo. He may not have killed anybody before. We're not aware of any time that he has. He's not suspected of anything that I'm aware of. And then remember, there's a lot of evidence in this case we don't know about yet, and we haven't heard anything about what they found on his computers or his cell phones. And also, then there were some interesting topics that he wrote about as a grad student, which also arguably are consistent with something like this. So these are all different forms of evidence. I think there's additional stuff we still don't know about. But look, I've got, California prison is filled with people righteously convicted for murders that they actually committed, with less evidence than exists in this case. So this is a powerful case, and people can disagree if they want, but I did these exclusively for 17 years as an Orange County DA and 26 years of prosecuting cases. And trust me, this is going to be very powerful when a jury hears this evidence.
Well said. I wrote down 5 pieces of evidence that I think are, like you were speaking about. The DNA on the knife sheath, of course, that is the most powerful piece of evidence they have. Although people try to minimize that by saying it's touch DNA, it could have gotten there anyway. Someone could have planted it. They couldn't have planted it because they didn't know who did it.
Don't you hate it? I'm sorry to interrupt. Don't you hate it when your DNA turns up at murder scenes where you never visited? I hate it when that happens.
Rather inconvenient.
Yeah, it happens to me at least twice a week, and I just irks me every time.
Someone flaked this poor guy, as they used to say in New York City. Then we have the vehicle video, which is the route going to, from, and away. The recon, 12 times he reconned 1122 King Road. 12 times. Also, a latent shoe print of a Vans shoe that had triangular shape on the bottom. I don't know if they recovered that shoe to match it up against, because there's something called individual characteristics that they can match up if they, in fact, do find that shoe to match it up. The other thing that no one talks about is the Dylan Mortensen identification of a male fitting Kohberger's description with bushy eyebrows. Dr. Debbie, your thoughts?
My thoughts, I agree with all that's been stated, Sergeant Bill, from Matt, from you, Professor Mike. For me, I'll just kind of sum it up as the top 3 for me as the criminologist. Number 1 is that little 1-inch knife sheath with Brian Kohberger's DNA. Once again, our DNA is nowhere there. The viewers, their DNA. So how and why is his DNA there? Because, you know, he's the one to have participated in this atrocity. And for me, DNA represents DNL, does not lie. So I view it as the silent witness. It says nothing, yet it speaks volumes. So I think that in and of itself is huge. If we look at data analytics, if we look at numerics, we're really talking about numbers that none of us really would have learned in, you know, calculus, high school math, college math. We're talking about the terminology octillion. It's huge. It's 1 in 1 octillion, which is 27 zeros, for this not to be Brian Kohberger. That for me is the foundation of what comes next. Of course, the phone pings, huge, and the surveillance even of the Elantra. And if we even look, and I'm sure we'll get there in the conversation, and this is what I do as a criminologist, take a look at you know, forensic psychology and the personality and the traits. The theory that I came up with on this case is JAR, J-A-R, jealousy, anger, revenge. I think Brian Kohberger was jealous individually and collectively of our 4 victims. He acted in a manner because he was angry. He really was somebody throughout his entirety, 28 years of life that we know of, never really had a platonic friendship, nor did he have any type of intimate relation. I do think he's an incel. And then ultimately took the revenge, took these innocent lives for his own vengeance against his place in life. And I am absolutely convinced it's him.
Thank you, Dr. Debbie. Good response. You know, Mike and Matt, I want to say that if Dylan Mortensen can, in a court of law, say, that's the guy I saw the night of the murders coming down the stairs, that's him. Because he was wearing a mask. They described it as a COVID mask. But people can still, there's other things about someone, their manner, their gait, the way they move, the bushy eyebrows, his eyes. Is there a possibility, and I'm going to, Mike, I'm going to ask you this. Is there a possibility that she could say, that's him, that's the guy? And I'll segue into Matt after you answer this. Is that going to be just a slam dunk ID?
You know, Bill, I don't know if I'm a prosecutor, and Matt would know better, but I don't know if as a prosecutor, I would want to get her on the witness stand and in beginning of the case, because she's going to come on very early on in the prosecution's case in chief, and she's going to be explaining about the time frame and who was where, what bedroom, that sort of thing, the kind of habits going on in that house. I don't think I would want to bring up, you know, like a dramatic point, like, do you see that person in the courtroom? I don't know, and I don't think I would, only because I don't think there was no talk of any lineup that she picked him out of a lineup, like a formally done lineup. So therefore, I don't think I would go for it at the trial, because if she's honest and she's like, well, it could, you know, he had like eyebrows. I remember his eyebrows, maybe like the defendant, but she is going to have to admit that doesn't look like the person that I saw that night. It was dark. I saw eyes. He was wearing dark clothing. He had a mask. I don't know if I would want to put her through that, because you got to figure, you don't want to open up the door on that witness to a defense attack on cross-examination. I don't know if I'd want to do that. It's going to be an interesting decision by the prosecutor. But if I was the prosecutor, I think you got so much other evidence. Just getting her up there on the stand and having her talk about, I saw a guy about 6 feet tall, slim, maybe athletic build, with eyebrows, large, thick eyebrows, and just leave it at that. I don't know. I wouldn't go. I don't know if I'd go any farther. Maybe I'm being scared, but I don't. I think I got so much other evidence. I don't want to ruin a witness at that early part of the case.
Matt, I don't know why I didn't ask you first, because Mike killed me here.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I like Mike's answer. And look, there's always that temptation, Bill, to go that extra step. And one of the things that we would always teach our young prosecutors in the DA's office, and the way that I was taught, is it's always better. The phrase was lean, mean, and clean. Lean, mean and clean. Like you put on the pieces of evidence that are your strongest. And one of the biggest mistakes that, and I know because I made it as a young prosecutor, and you see a lot of them do it, is they've got this great case and they think, okay, I'm just going to put, I got the cherry on top already. I'm going to add some sprinkles to it. And what'll happen, Mike's exactly right. And you've seen this happen, I'm sure, in cases that you've dealt with over the years. The defense lawyer will then say, aha, the entire case is built around her testimony as a witness. And what can she really see in the dark? And she'd been drinking. And why didn't she call the police? And he's got a COVID mask. Really? Now she comes in for the first time. Like, you can see them doing that. And so a savvy prosecutor, an experienced one, has gotten their teeth kicked in enough times by making that mistake. It's called overtrying your case. And it's always tempting. You're exactly right. Wouldn't it be a dramatic moment if she did that? But I think the finer point on that goes to Mike, and I agree, is that you go with the DNA and go, hey, we can't put it all on this poor young woman. And the defense is going to attack her anyway by saying, "Why, if you look so bad, why didn't you call the police?" She's already gotten enough heat because she didn't call 911. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think you go with these really strong, irrefutable pieces of evidence. Let the defense have to argue cell phone technology, because I've seen their arguments. I've read a bunch of them, and they're absurd, frankly. Now, they got to do it. I'm not criticizing them, but no jury is buying that. It just they're not workable in a courtroom. The same stuff with the DNA. I mean, that is just. And I mocked a little bit earlier. I don't mean to make light of such a serious and horrific case. However, it almost needs to be mocked. The touch DNA thing. Unless you're talking about blood or sperm fraction DNA, everything is touch DNA. And it's always on something transitory, unless it's like on a friggin' on a wall, or something that is immovable. Everything else moves. So you hear those arguments, and it's like fingerprints on a gun. That's pretty persuasive under a lot of circumstances. DNA on a gun. Well, a gun is a transitory object too. And this isn't a sock that they found in the bedroom. It's the friggin' sheath for the murder weapon. So all of that put together, I would keep it like my old trainer, this guy, Chris Evans, who's now a Superior Court judge. He's a phenomenally talented trial lawyer. When I was a brand new baby DA, he came into our training and he's like, lean, mean, and clean is your best friend. And I think they'd be well advised to approach this case that way.
Lou from the chat asked this, and I love to take the questions from the chat. How could one murder 4 people, leave no DNA? Well, he did. He left touch DNA. Leave a sheath. What bullshit? And nothing in his car.
Yeah. So just to spin on that, I love touch DNA as if it's bad DNA. The term, and that's not criticizing your viewer, but you hear that from the defense. DNA is DNA, guys, and 1 in an octillion means that's a complete genetic profile under the Cofiler Plus kit or the Profiler Plus kit. So that's a complete, every single allele aligning, that's a complete genetic profile. DNA is DNA. There's a British geneticist right at the rise of it who said DNA neither knows nor cares, it simply is. And so touch DNA, I don't know what that means. I understand the concept, but that doesn't mean it's somehow afforded less weight or a jury will consider it any less. And another one of the arguments we've heard is, how could one killer take out 4 people? That's because you're talking about one motivated guy against 3 young women who are all heavily intoxicated and a completely surprised boyfriend. That's how. And you guys know this. The Marine Corps K-bar knife next to the Roman gladius is probably the most vicious and effective stabbing instrument ever made by mankind. It has been used by the Marine Corps for over 100 years, and it is designed for one purpose, and that's killing human beings. So a motivated 28-year-old guy who's high on adrenaline and in there to take care of business, whatever his motivations are, could easily kill those 4 people, and that's exactly what happened here.
Matt, that's another part of the evidence here, is that we have the knife sheath and we have the DNA on the knife sheath, but the wounds will be consistent with what you just described as one of the most historical, horrible killing objects in history. And the wounds on the bodies will be consistent with that type of knife being used in these murders.
Yeah, 100%. Which is, and when the pathologist testifies to that, that's the one question that they need to ask. This is a stabbing instrument. Could a Marine Corps K-bar style knife have caused these wounds? And they're going to say yes, because of course they could. And you let the defense at that point spin around and see what they can do with that, and they can't properly tried. They can't do anything with that because it's true.
Absolutely. Let me just put this little short video on with Cece Moore.
How do they find your DNA if you are not in the system through this ancestral DNA thing? How does that work?
Yeah, it's loading, sorry. Basically, she's talking about how they get the ancestral DNA or match it to a person by building this a family tree. This is
Work. What needs to be available to find me through these other people?
That's a great question. And so it's very rare that we will find a close family member, and certainly not the suspect, in our genetic genealogy databases. So what we're looking for are people who share what we consider significant amounts of DNA, but it can be less than 1% of their DNA. If you share only 1% of your DNA, then you're likely third cousins with someone, which means you share your great-great-grandparents. And so we get a whole list of people that share segments of DNA with this unknown person we're trying to identify, and we can reverse engineer their family tree by who they're related to. So the only reason two people would share these significant stretches of DNA across their genome is if they have a common ancestor in their family tree. They have to have inherited that DNA from someone back in that tree. And so hopefully you'll get matches to different lines, their mother's side, their father's side. In some cases, you get all four grandparents' lines. And we all have unique family trees, except for our full siblings. And so if you're able to put enough of those ancestors back in that tree and piece it together, that's going to narrow it down to just one immediate family. Sometimes you can't get quite that far, so you might have to look at first cousins if you can only get to grandparents. But that's how we do it. We're not using close relatives in most of these cases. It's usually people who won't even know the suspect.
Understood. You still need a name, though. You need somewhere to start. So they have to have something that helps them develop an understanding.
Right. So we want to
so
have his
that
name.
is our last question, which is right. But the question is, why would you have any name like that had to have some type of other investigative link that we have to figure out from the authorities when they give it to us? Now, the only other question mark, and I'll use this to go into break. There are a lot of questions here, obviously, and that's okay. The authorities deserve confidence after making this arrest, assuming they can make it stick. In his past, is it true that he had a history of drug use? And if so, did he ever have any kind of interchange with authorities or any facilities where they had DNA available? That's something we'll discuss going into the next segment, because as we're developing a picture of who knew him and how they knew him, there are some more aspects to him that may have made him more identifiable. So
I'm going to get, it's amazing to me how Chris Cuomo is an expert in every field. And he has this expert in investigative genetic genealogy, and he just dismisses her opinions, and he knows everything. He starts talking about everything he knows, but it's just crazy. I mean, what I've learned in the past year from this case and from Rex Heuermann, of course, the Gilgo Beach case, is this investigative genetic genealogy is unbelievable. And the mitochondrial DNA in the Gilgo case, they solved the case from 1993, which showed that Rex Heuermann, who's, he's the Gilgo Beach serial killer, the accused, he started doing murders when he was 29, that they know of. That puts it back to him 29 years old. So building these family trees opens up a Pandora's box of potential. Dr. Debbie, I'm going to throw that right in your lap. Go ahead.
Thank you. And again, in agreement, all we need are facts. Everybody can have an opinion, but putting the opinions aside, when we look at DNA, when we look at genetic genealogy, when ultimately it goes to trial, there will be digital evidence. We've got the phone pings. I mean, this totality of what we're looking at now, I cannot see what potentially the defense is coming in with to negate all of this. All we know at the moment, unless there will be a surprise in August of 2025, is this long drive to nowhere. Who even knows if that is fact-based or if that's pure fiction? We have nothing to validate, document, corroborate, and that's what we're facing. That's what it looks like to me, one versus the other. It's huge on the prosecution side.
Absolutely. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, ring that bell. Thank you for all you folks giving us super chat. Robert P., thank you for the $2 super sticker. Courtney C., thank you for the $2.99 super sticker. Carol Grayston, thank you for the £2 super sticker. And if you're not subscribed or if you want to contribute to us financially, we have a Patreon with 4 different levels. We also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels. And we appreciate all of our friends, our families, and our subscribers that keep this channel going. One of the things I wanted to ask too is, again, so we saw in the thumbnail as we started this show that it's been 2 years. It's been 2 years. Now, why, if Brian Kohberger is so innocent, why has the defense agreed to waive the speedy trial and they want to just take their time? They're on a slow little cruise through the neighborhood. Professor Mike.
Bill, I think they did it because they waived that Sixth Amendment trial, right? Because, look, they're overwhelmed with probably the volume of information they got in discovery, and that discovery process. I'm not even sure if it's complete yet because there was problems with the FBI turning over some of their DNA secrets and the way that they went about constructing the DNA. And I would imagine that they're probably thinking, we don't really have much of a defense ourselves. What we're going to do is we're just going to figure out a way to attack what is given to us. Like when they talk about the alibi defense was supposed to be, we're going to provide you with a name and a location and the time and the circumstances under which we have actual witness who say they put Brian Kohberger at a particular place, particular time, drinking a beer with a girl at like 3 o'clock in the morning in Washington. He was not anywhere near Idaho that early morning. And the alibi, what they called an alibi, was just not a real person, but it was just to have someone contradict through their own prosecutors' witnesses, and they would just contradict them and during cross-examination, and so therefore the prosecutor's own witnesses would be like alibi witnesses for the defense, and that's total crap. So I think they're overwhelmed and they don't have a lot to go on. We talked about the cell phone technology, and his alibi later on was he was out driving somewhere on that particular night. And he had done it many times in the past when he was stressed out over his studies. The problem is they're trying to show they want to introduce habit, which means that if you act in a certain way on a very fairly consistent, regular basis, that would mean that you would act in a particular way on a particular night. I don't think they have that because of A, he ruined that idea because he turned off his cell phone, and B, the fact that he did go by there at like 9 o'clock in the morning. That's awful lot of coincidence that he would go by there at 9 o'clock in the morning. So I think they don't know what to do at this point. They're just grasping at straws.
Matt, you mentioned before that there could be other evidence we don't know about. And here's other evidence that we don't know what it turned out to be. And this is evidence taken from Brian Kohberger's home in Pullman, Washington. 1 natural type black glove, 1 Walmart receipt with 1 Dickies tag, 2 Marshall's receipts, dust container from Bissell. I'm not going to read all of this, but these are items. of evidence that we don't know what is the results of these items of evidence. None of us know. So when people say there's no evidence of anything, I don't think they really know that.
No, they don't know that, Bill. And the court, remember, has issued a gag order. So unless it's come up in one of the pretrial motions, we don't know the complete breadth of the prosecution evidence. But look, if this is all they have, in my view, there's no way a rational jury properly tried could conclude anything other than Brian Kohberger being the killer. That's just the way it is. As far as the time it takes to go to trial on these things, this is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal, and death penalty cases, of course, should and do undergo the highest level of appellate scrutiny. So the defense really does have an ace in that they get a reasonable period of time. Even though 2 years seems like a long time, last death penalty case I did, I think it was like 8 years before we finally came to trial. There was another one that it took us 10 years to get to trial because, especially in cases involving voluminous discovery, the defense has a right to go through all that. And we want that. And the worst thing that can happen in a case like this, from my perspective, it's all about the families. The community, of course, is important, but it's really about the victims' families. And having had to retry death penalty cases that came back on appeal, the only thing worse than a family having to go through something like this is to have to go through it again because of some avoidable error. And there's a three-pronged plan of attack in front of the Ninth Circuit on every capital case. They will attack the judge for instructional error almost every time. They will attack the prosecutor for committing some sort of misconduct, and they will attack the defense for what is known as IAC. One of the most successful examples of IAC are when a defense lawyer says IAC means ineffective assistance of counsel, and they reverse cases on that. So if a defense lawyer comes in, it's like King's X. If they say, "Hey, I'm just not ready. It's voluminous. I had a sick kid. My dog died. Whatever it may be, you have to ensure the integrity of the defendant's constitutional rights, and that's the judge's job. That's why they moved venue on this. It's to eliminate appellate issues, and it takes a long time, but long-term wise, it's to the benefit of the victims' families, which is what I think it's really all about.
When you talk about the victims' families, this is Stacy Chapin, the mother of Ethan Chapin, who happened to be a triplet.
Family. I mean, kids played soccer and sports, and then all of a sudden we were the top news story in the nation.
Apologize for this feeding. What basically, I'm going to speak for her. What she said, she really wants to put this behind her and her family because she has two other children that are triplets to Ethan, numbers 2 and 3, or whatever you want to say. But so she wants them to try to live a normal life, and she doesn't want to sort of dwell on the negativity of this. And, God bless her, because I wouldn't be like that. I would want justice. I would be vindictive. And that's more of the way most people would feel. But she and her family are I think, very special people. And you see on the right of this thumbnail is his sister, and all the way to the left, his brother, and of course the parents in the middle. And Ethan is the real tall fella who lost his life as being one of the Idaho 4. But you're right. We have a duty to the family to do the best possible job of investigation and prosecution of this case. And Matt, you've dealt with homicide victims' families throughout your career in Orange County, California. I'd like to just also say, because I like to plug his book, this is Matt's book, The Book of Murder, A Prosecutor's Journey Through Love and Death. Matt Murphy, who happened to be, I think it was 65-0 as a prosecutor, right, in homicides? Is that right?
52-0 in homicide. Thank you for saying that. And I tried 133 jury trials in my stint, and I didn't knock. I mean, I'm going to knock wood, even though it's too late for me to lose them now. I didn't lose any felonies. So yeah, so when it came to homicide, I've done a lot of capital case litigation. I did 8 death penalty trials in one form or another, and you know, I think that one thing that the prosecution should do on here, I think there's only 7 people on death row in the state of Idaho. So everybody involved in this is going to have, you know, some degree of maybe, well, there isn't a whole lot of capital case litigation that anybody in Idaho really has done. So one of the things that I would hope they would do is get these families, you know, as educated as possible in the process, because otherwise they can go crazy. The first thing we would always do is meet with the victims' families. I would always give them my personal cell number, so they knew that there were people, number one, that cared, and that also that were fighting for them. And that takes some of the stress off the families as they go through this very brutal, lengthy process. And, you know, ultimately you represent the community technically as a prosecutor, but, you know, morally you really have to do what you can for the families.
Yeah, I mean, there's in my police career, probably the most horrible job you could get is to make a death notification. That there's nothing really worse than that. Is to go to someone's home and tell them that you know, you love them. There's no easy way to do it. They can teach you how to do it, but it ruins your, not just your night, your day, your week, your month, your year to have to do that. Professor Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Billy, when you have to deal with that family and you have to make that phone call or you meet them in person, people don't realize it's not like TV. No, this is because, you know, you could have some actor, but to actually talk to them in a way, because you got to be professional. You can't cry. They can do whatever they have to do to feel better, to recover. But, you know, it's hard to sit there and assure them that, you know, the NYPD, and we have the greatest detectives in the world, you know, knock wood, and that they're going to take care of this. And as much as you want to let them know that you're going to do everything you can to solve this case, and that's your professional ethic, and you will do it. That doesn't matter to them because they've already lost someone. They're dying inside because they lost a loved one. And so even if you do catch that person and you feel good about your job and everything, they will never, ever be whole again. And so, and to think about that and to say, you know, what you kind of feel a little bit like it's not good enough in some way. You feel a little less because you just can't do what you would like to do. And you know, and no matter what, you can't make their lives, you can't put their lives back together. And that's a hard thing to do. Yeah.
You know, just from the perspective of someone that's done this before, I compared it like to being the Grim Reaper and showing up at someone's door. And you weren't a human being. You represented death. And you walked in and had to tell these people. And so once you delivered that message, they couldn't get you out of their house fast enough. And it was sort of a horrible feeling but you understand it. You know, they don't care who you are, but you represented something you just told me that was horrible. So get the hell out of my house right now, you know? Dr. Debbie, your thoughts?
So, Sergeant Bill, part of criminology, of course, is victimology. And what we know about that topic and study is there are 3 levels or areas: primary, secondary, tertiary. Primary victimization, of course, is unfortunately, sadly, tragically, the direct recipient of the crime, and certainly in this tragedy, Zaina, Ethan, Maddie, Kaylee. Secondary victimization, of course, now becomes the family members, the loved ones who have to deal with the pain, suffering, and trauma. And then tertiary really is the rest of us, meaning we may not know these family members directly, but we are just so shocked and sickened and saddened by this that it affects us as well. And something else, of course, regarding murder and death, particularly, is the manner in which people grieve depending upon who the victim is. So in other words, if we lose a parent, we understand that as our connection to our past. That's our history. The loss of a spouse, our connection to the present, the person with whom we interact daily. But the children, the death of a child, and particularly the murder, that is our connection to the future. And many forensic psychologists believe that that is the most difficult loss of all, the loss of the child.
Absolutely. Matt, you have a fan in the chat. Lucy Lou, Matt, I love the way you treated Julie Kubia's mom and Sam Herr's parents. I found it touching how you never forgot the families in that case. Your thoughts?
Oh, it's very nice for her to say. That's a perfect example of what you guys were just talking about. Actually, that was the Daniel Wozniak case. That was the guy who murdered his war hero neighbor to get at his combat pay, and it was one of the most diabolical cases ever. He murdered an innocent young woman and staged it to make it appear as if his real victim, Sam Herr, the first victim, had murdered her, and that's why he was in the wind. And it was all over trying to get at $60,000 of combat pay from Afghanistan. And people deal with that grief. It's a spectrum, I think, and a lot of them move around, but the parents tend to be somewhere between just extreme sadness, like apoplectic grief, and anger, and they kind of wind up somewhere in there. And Julie Kibuishi's mom was one of the sweetest, nicest people. And you talk about that grief in a death notification. I don't know how you guys did that. I really don't. I participated in one of those, and I never wanted to do it again. But as a prosecutor, we would work with those families for years. And that was a family that I actually got very close to. Both families, not Steve Herr and his wife Raquel, and Masa and June Kibuishi, and they were just the nicest people. And on my wall in my office, there was a photo taken right after the death verdict on that case, and we went through years and years of some of the most contentious litigation imaginable, and it was very important to those families. Even though it's symbolic in the state of California, they wanted a jury to come back and say, we understand California's never going to execute you, Mr. Wozniak, but what you did was so bad, and these victims were so good that you deserve to die for what you did. And that's the voice of the community. And that really did help the families. And anyway, there's a picture of her hugging me after the jury came back with the verdict favoring the families. And I treasure that. It's on my wall. And it just, and Mike is absolutely right. You can never bring their loved one back, but you can prevent the worst thing, the worst of the worst. Like the worst thing anybody can imagine is a loved one is murdered. But something worse than that is the person then gets away with it, or gets a sentence less than what they deserve. And that's truly the worst of the worst, I think, that we can experience as humans on the earth. So, and I really appreciated Dr. Goodman's comments on tertiary impact or stress or grief on these things. And police officers certainly deal with that. That nightmare we all have is that we haven't studied for the test. Like the one that we have where you go up and you forgot to drop the class, or that gets replaced for a lot of prosecutors because it's not the scenes that traumatize you. It's not the gore, the decapitations, or the decomp cases. That stuff is like just haunted house. You can compartmentalize that. It's the responsibility on your shoulders of trying to bring justice to those families. And especially on the difficult cases, the cold cases, the tough ones, the ones where, there's a really good defense, and you wake up in the middle of the night a lot thinking that you don't want to let those people down. And my haven't studied for the test dream has been replaced by I'm standing up in front of a jury, and I've had this one 1,000 times at least. I'm standing up in front of a jury and they're not listening to me. And I'm trying to make this argument and they're not paying attention and they're shaking their heads. That is my nightmare. And I think I probably have to go back to therapy now because I've been having that dream a lot lately.
That's assistant DA PTSD.
Yeah.
We have cop PTSD. You have DA PTSD.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, and in all of these cases, we've seen so many big cases this year that we've covered on this show and other podcasts have covered, and there's so much because of all of the basically the light shined on all of these cases by so many different opinions. Who is Brian Kohberger? We know that he was a doctoral student at Washington University. We know he was from Pennsylvania, but we know at one time he was a heroin addict. He's probably a loner. I mean, all of these theories about him being an incel and these other things. And what we would say, being in law enforcement, we say, no way does someone go out on the first time and kill 4 people. But I would never say that because I've seen someone have no criminal history and start out with the most horrific crime ever. Professor Mike.
Yeah, Billy, it's really strange because, he is a loner. He doesn't seem to have a lot of close friends. But he has a normal, quite regular, common family, 2 sisters, a mom and a dad, a very traditional family. And here he is, someone who outwardly, in some respects, looks like a very successful student. Got his bachelor's degree. He's got his master's degree from DeSale or something like that. And then he goes out to the University of Washington. And suddenly, from the time he gets there in August till November 13th, he appears to be an ordinary student. Yeah, he's having some problems. So it is rather strange. But as you're talking, I would like to ask Dr. Debbie Goodman a question. And that is, and this has bothered me because even though we know they got his DNA and I'm 100,000% sure it's him, is it possible that he began having some sort of murder ideation in his head, and within, say, 6 weeks of getting to Washington, a place he'd never been before, and that he had found somebody to be enamored with, infatuated with, and plan a killing? Is that something that have you ever run across that in that really brief time period?
Absolutely, Professor Mike, 100%. I think that he was interested in, fascinated by the field of criminology, obtaining a bachelor's and master's degree, and he wasn't too far in yet to the doctoral study, but I've thought about this too, and I think he made a very intentional and purposeful decision, almost like his own social experiment, because he would have been well versed on who knows how many dozens and possibly hundreds of cases of high profile status of serial killing, mass killing. I think he would have gone on to become a serial killer had he not been caught as a mass murderer. And everything that we've talked about on other high profile cases, or the times we've talked about him, the mens rea, I think, was there, the criminal mindset. And then, he's thinking about it, he's planning it, very intentional, very purposeful. And then, of course, the actus reus, carrying it out. I would also add to, the question that Sergeant Bill asked you, Professor Mike, about who is Brian Kohberger. I absolutely think he's a sociopath. He has zero remorse. I don't think we'll ever see a tear shed from him. If and when we might, it's all going to be the alligator tears, right? And self-reflection about what will be the rest of his life, potentially behind bars. And I think he's also a hedonistic individual. When we talk about hedonistic murderers, these are people who derive pleasure from beginning, middle, till the end. They think about the crime, they plan it, they carry it out, and they're also intrigued by the aftermath. And all of a sudden, for somebody whose name we never knew, nobody heard of this guy, now the whole world knows his name, and he enjoys this.
Dr. Debbie was like, you did compare him, and others have compared him to a serial killer. And Matt, I wanted to ask you this question, was this Brian Kohberger's first time out?
Well, it sure looks like it. with the resources available, especially with how they went into the familial DNA, looks like it was. Now, we don't know what he did to lead up to this, but I totally agree with Dr. Goodman. This has all the makings of a serial killer, whether there are sexual components or not. From the prosecution standpoint, when you do these bifurcated death penalty cases, the first phase is the guilt phase. Then you get into the penalty. The jury will be tasked to decide. They will weigh the aggravating circumstances versus the mitigating circumstances. So what the defense is going to do is they're going to have unlimited resources built to answer that question: who is Brian Kohberger? They'll get into his school history. They'll talk to whatever friends he had. If he was ever bullied, we're probably going to get information on that. They will dig up every mitigating fact for the jury to consider. In California, they're called the A through K factors. So it's A factor is circumstances of the offense, which include very significantly impact upon the family members. And the jury is told you have to assign an individual weight to all of those things, brutality of the crime, all those sorts of things, and balance it against any factors in mitigation. And if the aggravating factors substantially outweigh the mitigating, well, then they can come back with a death verdict. If they don't, then they're supposed to return a verdict of life. That's the way the legal framework breaks down. So as a prosecutor, remember, motive is not an element to the crime of murder. So it's very interesting to think about, what compelled him to do it. Was he there to rape one of the women, and then the plan went pear-shaped because there's another woman in her bed sleeping? Who knows? But it's like a lot of the sex cases that I used to prosecute before I got to homicide. We don't really have to get into their heads all that much. If he did it, to a certain extent, I don't care who Brian Kohberger is or what made him do it or what was going on in his head. And more importantly, as a prosecutor, I don't have to prove any of that. All I have to prove is that he went in there with a knife, and that makes it a first-degree residential burglary regardless of what his intent was. He slaughtered 4 kids, and the grief that those families went through so substantially outweigh whatever they're going to be able to dig up in his background that he deserves a death penalty. I think that's the framework that the prosecution is going to approach it with, and I think that's the right way to go.
Just when people look at, again, who is he, and if you look at the old videos on this case when it was just, they didn't catch him yet. And Banfield, is it a cold case? After 6 weeks, it was like we were like pulling our hair out. No, it's not a damn cold case after 6 weeks. Bring in the FBI, bring in the CIA, bring in the National Guard. It's like crazy. No, let them work the damn case. It took 6 weeks. That's not unreasonable whatsoever. But there's overload of too many talking heads that don't know what the hell they're talking about, giving their opinions on this stuff. And the regular consumer, they're all over the place because they're getting all these opinions. And then this one guy from New York, I won't even mention his name, he wrote a book on it. And he's a former writer for the New York Times. He doesn't know shit about homicide investigation, but he's being interviewed on every station as an expert. Why are they interviewing this guy? He's a writer, and he's a biased writer, And so it's like that stuff drove me out of my mind as this case was going on. And now here we are 2 years later. And how much more do we even know about Brian Kohberger? Professor Mike.
Yeah, Billy, I'm fascinated by that, but who he is, but Matt's right. It doesn't really matter so long as you prove that he was there at that particular time with that particular weapon and he killed them. But it was really frustrating. 6 weeks is nothing. It might take you 6 weeks to get blood work back from a lab on some dead person's, autopsy or cell phone information from Verizon. 6 weeks is nothing. That's warp speed in this case. Thankfully, in this case, the Moscow, Idaho chief, I think Chief Fry, he got lambasted because people said he's way in over his head. He was smart enough to call in the state police, and within 24 hours, the FBI was there helping out every step of the way. He had excellent help. 6 weeks is warp speed. And unfortunately, because you watch Law and Order on TV, everything's done within 60 minutes. And the times they give you, and they always give you the dramatic music, and here we are in the DA's office, here we are in the trial, here we are this, and it just goes boom, 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 and it's done. And that is a huge disservice to, I think, to the public, because they really get a false sense of how criminal investigations are done. And it's a real disservice to the cops in this case. The idea, this is a cold case. When we heard about it, I remember joking about it with you. It was like, what's cold about it? You know, it's 6 weeks. They're right in the middle of it. That's really sad, because that did a huge disservice and really made people, I think, question the police, what they were doing and what answers they would come up with. And unfortunately, also with the fact that there's no leaks whatsoever, everybody's actually respecting the judges, John Judge's, attempt to stop leaks. We know so little about the case that conspiracies abound. Oh, the police are framing him, all this kind of stuff. And that's a real disservice.
I love to tell people, like, when they, especially about the cell phone stuff, and I don't even know what it costs now. I remember when I was on the NYPD, it was $500 a day to dump a phone, or to get AT&T or Verizon to give you, oh, you want the whole weekend? Okay, we'll do it for $1,500. And then people were like, you mean the police department has to pay for that? Yeah, they got to pay for it. These companies are not abused putting 10 people to work to do all this phone work. So, I mean, it's just an interesting aside, because people have no idea that police departments, first of all, have to get a search warrant, subpoena, whatever, get all this information. And then again, as Mike said before, it doesn't come back. They're not impressed that you're the police department and we're going to do it for you yesterday. We're going to take our time and we're going to hand it to you when we get it. Matt.
Yeah. So look, you guys are absolutely right. 6 weeks is light speed. And this police chief did everything right. He's got a small department with limited resources. He didn't let his ego get in the way. He called the state police. They brought in the FBI, and they were off to the races. And another problem I've got with that is, there's no statute of limitations on murder. And sometimes, like Gilgo Beach is a good example of that. You had essentially an inept team. Some say a corrupt team, but at the very least, an inept team initially investigating that. A new DA comes in, and he brings in new investigators, and they put it together. And to think that 6 weeks is somehow old, we want families to be able to, hang in there while a case is properly investigated. Also, just the idea that, is a different topic, but the police framed Brian Kohberger. The prospect of police, especially in conjunction with the FBI's involvement, framing anybody is, I'm sorry, it's moronic. Not to insult anybody on there, that's a moronic thing to think, because that means that the real killer is still on the loose. I couldn't agree with Dr. Goodman more. This is a serial killer. This has all the makings of the serial killer. And guess what happens? If you arrest the wrong guy in a serial killing, you're going to get another murder, and it's going to be your fault for arresting the wrong guy. No cops want to do that. And Brian Kohberger, it's not like, what possible reason could anybody have to do that? And it would have to be a conspiracy. It's absurd. And, everybody wants to be the smartest person in the room. And a lot of times people advance conspiracy theories. It's kind of like that old adage, right? Like, how would you know if you were insane? How would a crazy person really know? Well, how would you know if you're really stupid? You think you're the smartest person in the room. And there's a lot of that out there. I've read some of the stuff, not necessarily I've read some of the theories on Kohberger, and it's like, let me tell you, like, those opinions and people who think like that, everybody's brave on a keyboard. That's why you get 20 peremptory challenges as a prosecutor to kick jurors who are just wacko. And that's why you can kick them for any reason, to keep people like that off of a jury. And guess how many the defense has? 20 peremptories, just like the prosecution, to kick out loony conspiracy theorists that might want to convict your guy. So, the system's designed for fairness. I think this judge is doing a pretty good job. And I think that, hopefully all those wackos, will be kept off this jury.
Read the chat tonight.
Yeah, no, I'm not insulting any of your readers. It's just a lot of it is your viewers. It's a lot of this comes from a good place. They want to be right, but there's 4 grieving families here, and fantasies are a luxury. when it comes to the actual prosecution of these cases. And these kids were slaughtered, and they deserve justice.
You know, I think that seeing what I've been seeing in regards to the death penalty, it's been hijacked by the anti-death penalty crowd, and it's almost not worth going for it, because whoever gets the death penalty as a penalty, if they get convicted, they're not going to get it for 20 or 30 years. Endless, and it costs millions and millions of dollars. Maybe life without parole should actually mean that, you know, because that's why people get so suspect, because we know that in New York State, life without parole means nothing. They release cop killers every a week in New York State. So perhaps the whole electorate, all the people that are looking at the criminal justice system, I'm pro death penalty. And then when you see the reality of it, it's almost not worth it. Dr. Debbie.
Right. Well, I liked a lot of what Matt said, and particularly the one word that I really want to highlight is justice. And, you know, sometimes there are words like closure and healing, but again, I don't know how a family closes the chapter on their son or daughter who has been brutally murdered, and the healing process could take a lifetime. But I think when these families feel that justice has occurred, now what will that mean for each of the four, some of whom may indeed want the death penalty, others may be satisfied with 4 life sentences with no parole. And we also know statistically it is difficult for members of a jury to agree in many instances in totality for a sentence of death. And I also like what Matt said about some of these aggravating conditions versus mitigating. I just feel that whatever the defense would bring to the table, if there's going to be something, you know, monumental that we simply don't know yet, I still cannot imagine whatever this unknown piece to the puzzle might be, that some way, somehow it would supersede everything else that we've discussed that we know. So I do like the jury system. I believe that it's an honor and a privilege for those who are selected to serve. And I think they will do their job in a very dutiful and determined and dedicated manner to reach justice.
You know, the judge in this case, Judge Hipple, I believe his name is, put a picture of him up on the screen. He does seem like a no-nonsense judge. Judge Stephen Hippler, actually, Hippler. Because let's not forget, this case was tossed to Boise, Idaho from Moscow, Latah County, because the defense wanted that because they felt that Brian Kohberger could not get a fair trial. So Boise didn't want this, but they have it right now. And now this case, again, he had outlined August 11th to November 7th as the window of time that they're going to allot for this case. If in fact it does go to trial during those dates, your thought about that length of time, Matt?
Well, the last death penalty case I did took 6 months. And, you know, again, it's due process for the defendant. We want that, you know, and Idaho might very well carry out an execution one day, and he's a young guy. So, you know, I think that I agree. This judge appears to be no nonsense. That's exactly what this case needs. But, you know, he, again, will be very cautious because he will be reviewed by the Idaho Supreme Court and then also ultimately the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal, and potentially higher, depending on what the issues are that come up. But if I could just backtrack for a second, Bill, one of the most common arguments we hear regarding the death penalty is this idea of how expensive it is. And, you know, I've always had an issue with that, because what these people do that are against the death penalty, that believe it's barbaric, and there are good philosophical reasons why somebody could be opposed to the death penalty, you know, and you know, all of those reasons aren't wrong, and they're worthy of like rational, cool-headed discussion. But one of the things that just drives me crazy is they'll look at death row, and they'll count the inmates, and they'll count how much it costs, and they'll go, look at how expensive it is to have the death penalty, as if those murders never took place in the first place. You know, like you with life without possibility of parole or a life sentence on them, you have the same guard with the same dental plan with the same union, you know, and the inmates are going to get the same medicine as they get older. You have the same, like, the appellate lawyers aren't going to run off and join the Peace Corps. They're going to be bringing the same motions, challenging the same convictions. They'll just be arguing about things that aren't the death penalty. So this idea that we're going to save a ton of cash if we eliminate the death penalty just is not true. I've debated other people at law schools around Orange County. I've had this discussion many times, and I'm no, like, if they eliminated it in California and my guys truly got life without possibility of parole, I wouldn't lose a minute of sleep over that. But let's have honest arguments, and that's not one of them. Maybe it's slightly more expensive, you know, given the nature of maybe the appellate process, but it is nowhere near as expensive as they say. They eliminate it as if the murder didn't happen, and it kind of drives me nuts.
Wow, Matt, you know, something, I didn't even think of some of those things, but then, you know, you and Mike, you got law degrees. I didn't, I was sitting in a dirty alley on 125th. my mom and dad couldn't afford law school. I'm just kidding. That's on me. But, you know, I did the job rather than go to school. Well, I actually went back to school my 17th year in the police department, got my master's degree, but certainly wasn't a law degree. But I love the way you guys talk. You have all these good lawyer words like egregious, and, you know, stuff like that. You know, we've been on for an hour and 16 minutes. I'm gonna go around the clock. I'm gonna start with you, Dr. Debbie. Your final thoughts.
Final thoughts would be one of thanks to you, Sergeant Bill, Professor Mike, and Matt, hearing his thoughts, you know, for recognizing what this day is. It's a sad day, it's a somber day, but I do believe in these types of conversations and discussions so we can honor and respect and remember the lives lost. I love our field. I believe in our field. I do think we will have an outcome that will be aligned with justice. And I have no doubt that the individual who is sitting behind bars is the individual who committed these brutal attacks.
Thank you, Dr. Debbie. Professor Mike, your final thoughts.
Bill, I just think that the viewers should know that no matter what happens in this trial, it's going to be a long trial, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. No matter how it goes, you know, Brian Kohberger is not going to be walking down the street anywhere near in anybody's neighborhood anytime soon. No matter what happens, he's going to be spending the rest of his life behind bars, whether he meets death through an electrocution, a firing squad, or natural causes. He's not going anywhere. So people should take heart in that. And the fact that we're doing all this work, law enforcement is doing all this work and being this careful, that's fine, because we would never, ever want to make a mistake. As little as possible, make any kind of mistake in this sort of case. We think we got the right guy, and we're going to go forward with it with all the evidence we have. It appears that he is singularly responsible for all of these crimes, and we should have faith in the criminal justice system.
Very well said. I just want to give another quick plug to Matt's book, because now, you know, he's not with the Orange County DA's office, so he needs money now. So
Thank you, Bill.
I bought a copy.
Thank you.
You can get this book on Amazon, The Book of Murder, A Prosecutor's Journey Through Love and Death, Matt Murphy. Matt's also what I like to refer to as a talking head for ABC, 48 Hours. He's actually, I'll use a kinder expression, he's the legal expert for ABC News.
Talking head's fine. Yeah.
Matt, your final words.
Yeah, look, this was a really well done investigation. We had good cops. I think we got good prosecutors. They've made good decisions, and we got a good judge. I have no doubt that in Idaho they're going to get a good jury, and I think justice is going to be done on this case. I really do.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank all three of you guys. What fantastic guests, Professor Mike, Dr. Debbie Goodman, and of course Matt Murphy, who also happens to be a surfer. I don't know if you guys know that.
You can tell by the sun damage.
He's a California boy, and he's a surfer. Anyway, folks, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. On behalf of myself and Professor Mike from Police Off the Cuff, have a great night, everyone, and God bless.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
One episode just ain't enough.